Thank you for joining us today for our launch webinar titled Advancing Common Mental Health Disorder Clinical Research and Care Through a Digital Measure Set. My name is Samantha McClanahan, and I had the pleasure of leading this initiative at the Digital Medicine Society, a global nonprofit dedicated to advancing the safe, effective, and equitable use of digital approaches to redefine healthcare and improve lives. This work was conducted as part of the Digital Health Measurement Collaborative Community, or DATAcc, which is a collaborative community led by DIME in partnership with FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health. DATAcc provides a forum where experts and partners from across the digital health ecosphere can come together and advance the development and use of digital measurements in research and care with the ultimate goal of improving lives. Today's discussion will focus on advancing the measurement of common mental health disorders through the development of objective sensor-generated digital measure set. We'll also explore how standardized approaches can help support more effective research, therapeutic development, and clinical care across these conditions. Through the Common Mental Health Disorders Digital Measurement Pre-Competitive Collaboration, we work with a diverse group of stakeholders across the field to develop a digital measure set and accompanying application guides to support its implementation in research and care. And we're really excited to share these resources that we've developed in this effort with you here today. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce our CEO, Jennifer Goldsack, for opening remarks. Jen, I'll pass to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sam. And thank you to everyone who has participated on this project team. We had an extraordinary group of leaders, and I thank you all for your dedication to, really working hard to make sure we're doing everything possible in this digital era of medicine to make sure that we are doing our best to care for individuals with common mental health disorders. And it's interesting, we are in a moment where there's an increased recognition of the burden of common mental health disorders, the suffering it brings to individuals directly, as well as the impact it has on concomitant conditions, and as well as burdens such as financial burdens, whether that's to the individual, whether it's healthcare utilization, or whether it's the burden of not being able to fully participate in an individual's lives in the way in which they deserve. And it's not just recognition, and why I'm so proud of the experts we have speaking today, why I'm so proud of this project team is there's also action. There's relentless commitment to the development of new therapies, new classes of drugs, and other classes that are going beyond what we have available, as well as thinking critically about when we see responders to certain drugs, what can we learn about the diagnoses that we are administering? How can we better match patients to new therapies? That feeds into new care pathways that are emerging, relentless commitment to accessing sort of mental health support, treatment, and care that's driven by new payment incentives to support individuals and organizations providing care that actually works. There's also the need for ongoing research. We still need a better understanding of common mental health disorders. We need to go beyond the current diagnostic categories. We need to think about phenotypes. We need to think about how we truly understand the lived experience of individuals with common mental health disorders so we can best respond with mental health now truly part of big H healthcare, not just domestically here in the US, but globally. And we've really dug into a lot of that work, not just through this project, but previously and following the lead of our colleagues at Wellcome, and delighted to be joined by those colleagues today. We issued a report at the beginning of last year that sort of found and reported that globally, the measures that we have of mental health are overwhelmingly subjective, that we can look at common behaviors, sleep, physical activity, social interactions, even because we all do too much of it, device interactions, and we can draw strong conclusions about someone's mental health. There is the opportunity for us to use sensor-based technologies to probe these behaviors of individuals to help us better understand, be more compassionate, develop better therapies, determine outcomes, optimize care pathways. But in order to do that, we have to think about a harmonized approach to develop fit-for-purpose measures, standards, practices, ethics, implementation across the board. And that's exactly what we've done in this project. And so I want to make sure that we spend the majority of our time diving into the landscape in which this tremendous work lands, as well as a deep dive into the digital measure set that we propose as fundamentally powerful to improve the lives of individuals with common mental health disorders going forward. So let me welcome all of you. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your commitment to improving the lives of individuals with common mental health disorders. Thank you to everyone who has worked hard on this project team over the last 8 months. And to our speakers in particular, you are all driving pathways for improvement. Your courage is enormous, your commitment is enormous, and look forward not only to reviewing the new resources today, but putting them into action with all of you. So with that, Sam, let me hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Jen, for those amazing opening remarks, really setting the stage for why we're all here together and the goal shared among everyone here, not only the panelists and the project partners, but those of you joining us in this webinar today. We are very appreciative of all you do. With that, I'd also like to extend a sincere appreciation to the many stakeholders who helped shape this initiative. This project benefited from the perspectives and expertise of a diverse community spanning industry, advocacy, and research. Through their engagement and collaboration, they were extremely instrumental throughout this effort, and we are grateful for all of their contributions and time. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for our first panel discussion today, Katie Adams of MedCity News. Katie is a leading voice covering healthcare innovation and brings a unique perspective to today's conversation. Katie, thank you so much for being here with us today, and I'll pass it over to you to introduce the panelists and get us started.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to speak to our panelists today. I actually got the chance to cover the launch of this project last August, and I was really interested in the story because the promise was really significant, to establish this set of digital measures for the evaluation of common mental health disorders. That set of measures has never existed before, and those disorders affect millions and millions of people. So whenever I cover an announcement that has a really big promise like that, I'd try to make a note to follow up a year later to see if they're actually making any progress on that or what that looks like. And in this case, Dime had actually reached out to me before that reminder ever got delivered to me, saying that they were ready to share some of their results. So I think at least the speed of innovation there was really great to see, and I can't wait to hear more about what made that all possible. So I think I'll start off the conversation with you, Jacob, and maybe we can do some level setting on what's changed, I would say, both in the tech world and in the clinical world too, that makes this the right time to really, use digital health tools in mental health care and start to scale the use of those tools.
Well, it's great to be here. So first, I'll just briefly introduce myself. So my name is Jacob Schiff. I work at CMS as the Chief AI and Technology Officer of the Innovation Center. In my role, I'm particularly focused on how do we evolve how we pay for healthcare to enable the fullest potential of these technologies to meaningfully improve healthcare outcomes and affordability. So to your question, Katie, of what's changed, well, the gap between what is possible, the potential of these capabilities, and the status quo has never been bigger, and it is only growing. Certainly at CMS, we are focused on how do we bridge that gap using the levers that we have, which includes how we pay for healthcare. Since I guess the last touch point you alluded to, CMS has been hard to work on that. We recently introduced a new what we call model, a payment program that pays for outcomes rather than activities and gives organizations more flexibility around how they achieve those outcomes, including through the use of technology, including for mental health conditions. So that's certainly something that's new that we can speak to. And there are also many other developments that have been at play over the last couple of months.
Excellent. I think I'm gonna go to you, Lampros, next, and maybe you can provide some insight on where the current system is actually breaking down, because I know there are, a lot of barriers, but I'm curious about, is it access, measurement, implementation? What does that look like?
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And also just to introduce myself, hi everyone. My name is Lampros. I am a technology manager at the Wellcome Trust, which is a foundation that invests heavily in medical research. So I think that the biggest kind of missing layer is this interpretive layer, the measurement. So there has been kind of heavy investment in the foundation of these wearable devices. So the sensor engineering, the algorithmic development, and I think what we're missing is this clinical interpretation and actionability. There is a lot of focus on trying to make every single outcome from wearables as accurate as possible. But even if you have 100% accuracy, it is not entirely clear what this actually means for clinical care and patients. So I think this is why the work that Dime is doing is so exciting because it really tackles that middle layer that we need a lot more work on.
Anyone can chime into this next one, but I'm wondering what successful implementation actually looks like, and if there's, any examples you can point to of a model that is working in practice and can be scaled.
I don't know that I have a model. And hello, I'm Jessica Jackson, and I am the Vice President of Alliance Development for Men's Health America. Men's Health America is the oldest patient advocacy organization in the US, and I am a clinical psychologist by training, so I come at it really from that intersection lens. I don't know that I have an example of implementation that's doing well. I will say what successful implementation looks like to us is really also meeting patients where they are. I think the focus often is on what are the outcomes. And when we measure outcomes, we're really thinking from a clinical lens, provider lens, payer lens, like how do we, think about reimbursement? But we also have to think about it from a lens of patients. What will they engage with? What are the outcomes that matter for them that will allow them to continue to participate? So I think successful implementation will really show or demonstrate the collaboration between patients and providers and getting us to the outcomes that we want.
If we don't start to, change how we implement these digital health tools and how we measure mental health conditions, I'm wondering if you can all contextualize, and maybe Jessica, you can start us off. What's at risk there? What the downstream effects might be of not kind of capturing this moment?
Yeah, I think the downstream impact will be that we will be using old frameworks. I joke with colleagues a lot. A lot of mental health is still done during the same way that Freud was doing it. Like, there's a lot of things that are actually really old, right? And I know that's dramatic, but it is of how we think about things. And we're often with digital tools like wearables trying to fit kind of new wine in old skins. And so one of the risks that we see is access. If we are not thinking about how to update how we're measuring things, we will risk excluding folks for digital technologies that could be really useful for them. And it will impact who is able to access the new interventions, right? Because not everyone will fit neatly. You think about youth, you think about psychosis, suicide prevention, all of that is not going to fit neatly into the measurements that we're thinking about. And so we risk excluding them from being able to use new technologies.
I'll add, I think there's a risk of inaction. There's a cost of inaction, which is patients not getting effective care, and we know what happens when they don't. So those are lives that are harmed or lost. And shame on us if we don't meet the moment. I think there's also a risk of irrelevance, which is just of regulatory bodies and other agents and other payers and other stakeholders. Because the reality is, if there are these new capabilities that exist, patients are seeking solutions. They will seek those out, and the question is really how they will use them. Will they be using them within safe and effective settings or not? So that's the other risk if we don't embrace these capabilities.
And sorry, Katie, can I add a third one? So I really echo what Jessica said around widening health inequalities if we don't act and if we do not act, and what Jacob was saying around, the opportunity to improve care. And other one, like a third one that is important to me is also that if we do not act, it's actually consumer wearable companies that will fill this vacuum. So all these companies that have trackers are actually, shipping mental health features to hundreds of millions of users around the world. And these features are based on proprietary algorithms with unclear validation. So if the clinical and research community does not establish evidence-based standards, the market will, set de facto standards without us, and those standards will be optimized for engagement and not for clinical usefulness and validity. So that's a third one for me.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely a good one to add. And Annie, I would love to bring you into the conversation by getting your perspective on how the field is thinking about evidence and I think also accountability and transparency. Because often, a lot of these digital health tools out there, AI tools out there, can rely very heavily on marketing claims, which often, outpace what's actually measured or what's actually defined. So I'd love to learn more about, how the field's approaching evidence.
Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect of. So we want obviously trustworthy technologies that get to people where they are, because as we've all alluded to and talked about, there's a huge mental health crisis and there's not enough providers, and so these digital health technologies really do have opportunity to get care to people who need it, and people are already using it. And so the more we can have efforts like this that sort of raise the tide of evidence that support um, transparent use of these technologies. And we did hold an advisory committee meeting last fall on digital mental health devices because we wanted to get perspective from externally on what does it look like from a regulatory perspective to have ensure innovation because the pace of these technologies are evolving and the need is clear, but then also try to ensure that we have appropriate safeguards in terms of thinking about the safety and effectiveness of these technologies and how they meet people. And so efforts like this DIME work, other standards activities, I think are really important. It's not just an FDA challenge or a CMS challenge or a provider challenge, but we really need to all come together in terms like what does good look like and what does that ultimately mean for patient access and patient care.
I'm wondering if you can all speak a little bit more about, what a collaborative effort this has been, and how this work will, need to continue involving stakeholders, not only from, within the government, the federal government, but within, your traditional healthcare providers, your tech-enabled ones, and kind of, um, these often treat different patient populations and have different approaches and how, kind of giving everyone a seat at the table is really critical here. If you could talk about what that's looked like over the past few years.
I'm happy to take a stab at that. So I think certainly one area is different agencies and entities have different authorities or focus areas. And I think sort of each innovating, removing barriers within their lane and doing so collaboratively can ultimately support the potential. So to be more specific, of course, CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, focuses on payment in particular. And as I mentioned earlier, identifying, well, what are the payment related barriers to these adoption of these technologies? Maybe activity-based reimbursement can be one. How can we as CMS innovate in that lane? We, in the case of the access model, worked with FDA an innovation on their side, which is the regulatory piece. And how can there be innovation there? And the initiative called Tempo, which is a pilot program. Similarly, there is this question of outcomes. Well, the industry, if we're saying we're going to pay for outcomes, then the question is, well, what are those outcomes? And that's an area where industry, whether that's societies, DIME, et cetera, can innovate around modernizing those outcomes. So that's an example of where you have each stakeholder moving the frontier in their respective lane, getting us to where we ultimately want to get.
Yeah, maybe just to double down on Jacob's comment, with the Tempo pilot and access, behavioral health is specifically an area called out because of both the public health need and the interest. And so being able to capture better outcomes is one of the things we've heard for many years. And in the advisory committee meeting is, PHQ-9 is not really the best outcome measure that really is reflective of how people are actually doing. And so efforts like this, where you're bringing together all the different stakeholders to really understand, like, are we measuring what's actually important and impactful for patients and providers that are ultimately moving the needle in terms of improving care versus just, a questionnaire that's been around for forever.
And to add to what Andy just said, I think it's important when we also bring the patient voice. So I've appreciated the collaborativeness of this project, and other projects that are ongoing where we're talking about the patient voice, because it helps us to address problems before they arise. if folks are not going to engage and then we have something on the market, something like the PHQ-9, as a clinician, I can tell you how many folks do not fill it out, right? If they don't feel it's relevant or connected to them, they just won't answer it, or they'll, do something like all zeros to get through to the next piece. And so I think being able to have these conversations, and as we were working on this project, to troubleshoot some of those things. People had really great ideas about, how different sensor-based technologies could be used, but then the reality is, well, what will this look like for someone in practice? How do you, incentivize or motivate them to leverage this if they don't feel like it's going to connect to them, which allows us to troubleshoot before it gets out there and there's a lot of investment in it and folks are not using it. So I think when folks include the patient voice, it helps them to really have a biopsychosocial perspective and say, like, this is really what's going to get us to the outcomes and prevent some of the barriers that we see come up sometimes when we do implementation.
Yeah, I think, you pointed out about the PH9 that, it's very standardized, obviously. You're filling out bubbles, but it's not that effective. So we need something that's, standardized and repeatable across different providers, but also effective and something that's going to give us, an accurate picture of a patient's health. I think, this push towards standardization and shared measures is, not just within mental health. We see this within healthcare with a lot of, interoperability initiatives, getting everyone on the same page. But would you agree that, this is kind of reflective of a broader movement within healthcare to become more standardized, but also not just standardized but effective?
Um, I'm happy to chip in on this because I actually think so. Welcome is a global foundation, right? We do not just focus on the US. We actually have a very big arm in the UK and low middle income countries, especially in Africa. And I think what these digital interventions, these digital tools also allow us to do is actually create standards of care for not just high income affluent countries, but actually something that can be translatable internationally. And this is really transformative for mental health. We don't really have frameworks for, what we have so far is point of care diagnostics, episodic interventions. We don't have frameworks for continuous monitorings and the generation of data streams over weeks and months. And the PHQ-9 is flawed, but it is a lot better than a kind of like a sloppy translation that we're trying to make and trying to kind of like integrate a questionnaire that was developed decades ago in affluent societies, in communities where you want to deliver care and you're just trying to use the same measurements. So wearables also offers that kind of like international aspect in the work that we do, that I think cannot be understated.
I do think that, Katie, to your question, I certainly think this is part of a broader movement certainly across chronic disease around measurement-based care, understanding how do we assess people's health status. Um, and so absolutely. And within mental health, my understanding is that this has been a multi-decade effort. I do think in my mind it's worth distinguishing between and I think there's two opportunities when it comes to this introducing these broadly speaking, digital measures. One is on the how do we understand like that person's status at any given moment? How well are they doing? And then the other, which is how do we better support the care delivery itself? The same measure could be the same thing, but it can also they can also diverge, right? So you can imagine being able to continuously assess someone's health status based on their sleep patterns or the like may or may not actually be what we, as a payer at least, want to measure and reward. But that may be new superpowers or new tools in the toolkit of the care delivery provider to better actually get them to whether that is approving their PHQ-9 or something more modern as well. So I think either way, there's a lot of opportunities to better use digital measures.
Certainly. Yeah, and with that, I kind of want to end the panel by looking forward, a look to the future on, you know, what needs to change or what would help create clear guardrails for the adoption, implementation of these digital measures, particularly from, the regulatory and reimbursement lens. And maybe Annie, you can start us off with that.
Sure. I mean, looking forward, obviously, with having our advisory committee meeting, we do plan to have follow-ups in terms of what we've learned and what we're planning to do. And then, the continued collaboration with CMS on the Tempo pilot, I think is going to be really important to us as a way to learn from that. And we're going to be able to learn as people are collecting the data in terms of, what does good look like, and are we actually seeing measurable and demonstrative changes in outcomes? And having efforts like this where we've got sort of a collaborative approach of what some of those different outcomes are. And, to Jacob's point, there are different things that are going to maybe matter for a regulatory perspective versus a payer perspective versus a provider or patient perspective, but at least we've got a common set of understanding of what are sort of those ultimate goals and what's going to be important to patients to actually support improving their mental health.
You asked about reimbursement. I'll just reinforce. This is live today. What I mean by that is come July, clinical organizations who want to get rewarded for driving clinical improvement on, in this case, depression and anxiety, can get reimbursed for doing so. That is anchored to today, PHQ-9 and GAD-7, also a functional measure, HUDAS. But that's already the case. And as I was alluding to earlier, if there are these new digital measures that can better support improvement on those outcome measures, there's an incentive to adopt those already. So that's already happening. And this can be a chassis for continued innovation as there are new measures that come forward and are validated. Those can be incorporated into models like what I was describing at CMS.
Excellent. It was wonderful to hear that, a lot of this is live today, and I'm sure we'll only start to see more of this innovation come down the pipeline. So that is all the time we have for today, but I think we were able to fit a lot of insight into a short amount of time, and I want to thank my panelists for letting us know more about what the current landscape looks like.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you again to the panelists for that insightful discussion. I think it really helps ground where the field is today, what it'll take to implement these digital measurements, and underscores the value that these resources that we're launching today will have in this space. With that, I would like to now spend a few moments walking through the resources that we have developed in this project. And so I'll share with you that we are extremely excited to share all of these resources that are now live on DIME's website, publicly available and open for use for the broader community. Our hope is that this will help accelerate the adoption of objective digital measurements for both clinical care as well as clinical research for common mental health disorders. And so now I'm sharing with you our homepage where our project lives. And here we really tailor to the resources that we built, how they are made for each of these different stakeholder groups, from clinical researchers and development leads to tech developers and those care teams. You'll also find some testimonials from our project partners of the importance of advancing objective digital measurements into mental health. These reflections highlight the potential for digital measurements to provide new insights into patients' experiences and supports more informed decision-making across research and care. As you continue through our site, you'll find our project partners again that are really instrumental in developing this work, as well as a few case studies of how these are currently being applied in practice. We encourage you to explore these examples after today's webinar, as they provide practical illustrations and inspiration to how we can use digital measurements now, approaches across several different types of settings. And with that, I would like to bring us to the heart of our work, which is that digital measure set for common mental health disorders. The common mental health disorders work that we selected here was based off of the high prevalence rate as well as global disease burden. And while I won't walk through each of these conditions today, you'll find all 8 of them represented within this framework. This conceptual model was built and grounded in DIME's Measurements That Matters framework, beginning with what matters most to patients. We drew upon a robust source of evidence base, including patient and caregiver perspectives, to identify meaningful aspects of health that could cross common mental health disorders. These include areas such as feeling like oneself, maintaining physical and mental energy, regulating emotions, the ability to maintain social relationships, and preserving that sense of meaning and purpose in their everyday life. From there, we identified concepts of interest to capture what matters most to patients through objective measurement. These resulting digital measurements includes a range of outcomes that can be measured and assessed with current digital health technologies. And through this conceptual model, you can see descriptions and examples for each of these measures. And this can be downloaded for further details and for you to explore more. As you move through this framework, you'll also find a section on emerging measures. These represent areas of growing digital maturity and include measures that might have specific relevance to specific mental health disorders rather than crossing across more broadly of those common mental health disorders. We see these as areas for continued research and encourage innovation within this space. As we move further down the page, we'll find a curated set of ontologies, data standards, and data resources for common mental health disorder digital measures. These resources support consistent data naming and structuring across the collection of digital measurements and are there to support scalable implementation across studies and settings. And these are specific to those outcomes to be measured areas. And so you can explore those in more depth. And we also provide a couple of examples of showing how digital measurements can be applied in practice today with a focus on data collection across common mental health disorders. And importantly here, we've made available our evidence source that informed the identification of these meaningful aspects of health. These findings draw on a broad patient population ranging from 9 years old to 80 years old, cutting across 38 different countries and really focusing in on patient perspectives as well as caregivers. And if you're interested in diving more into how this development process came for the selection of this digital measurement set, you'll find the results from our Delphi-informed process where experts use iterative rounds of consensus building to help define this digital measure set for common mental health disorders. We've also linked out that foundational work that informed this project that was commissioned by Welcome. And with this digital measure set, we developed application guides to help bring these measurements into practice. Our goal here is not only to define what we should be measuring, but how do we apply these in real-world settings. And so from that, we developed out 2 implementation guides. The first guide here focuses on endpoint implementation, providing insights on how digital measurements can be used as endpoints for mental health trials and where they can complement clinical outcomes assessment and endpoint selections currently. And the second guide focuses on emerging phenotype applications, exploring how digital measurements can be used in common mental health disorders trial to define subgroups and assess longitudinal changes with potential applications for both research and clinical care. And so if we dive a little bit more into clinical research, how these approaches can help identify more appropriate patient populations and improve trial design. And for that clinical care side, how they may be able to enable more personalized understanding of an individual's health trajectory and support more tailored treatment decisions along the way. And I'll briefly give a quick glimpse into one of these guides just to show you its structure. And so here we have an opening of what's in this guide and how it'll help you. Where digital measurements fit today, a little bit on the evidence and what is currently supported within the field with some takeaway from the literature findings, and a couple of strategies that you can use now. And within each of these strategies, we provide some insights into when you should use it, why it matters, and some application examples to help you get started. We also provided some additional resources to help incorporate sensor-based digital health technologies into clinical trials to support endpoints. And then we end with what additional evidence is still needed to generate in the field so we can truly unlock the value of digital measures for common mental health disorders. There are also spread throughout this resources as well as here at the bottom of the guides, additional resources from DIME that complement this work and provide further support for organizations interested in advancing digital measurement strategies. We encourage everyone to explore these resources in greater depth following today's webinar, download the materials, and share them with your colleagues across the field. And with that, I would like to now move to our final discussion for today and introduce our next panel session here I'm delighted to welcome several of the partners who helped shape this work from the very beginning. This conversation here can help provide an opportunity to really reflect on the development of these resources and to discuss their potential impact and explore where the field goes next. And so with that, it's my greatest pleasure to introduce our panelists here today. Arthi from Talkspace, Brett from Videra Health, Mona from BetterHelp, and Sharon from Phil's Therapeutics. Thank you all for joining us today. It is wonderful to be able to dive in deeper with each and every one of you and greatly appreciate all the time we've spent together over the last 9 months. And so to start us off, why is this work important right now? And what do digital measures help us understand about individuals living with common mental health disorders that are often missed with traditional assessments or diagnosis-based approaches? And Sharon, I'll start with you for this question.
All right. And so welcome, everyone. I'm Sharon Kaplan. I'm the VP of Clinical Operations at Phil Therapeutics, and I've been a clinician for almost 25 years, and as and everyone on this panel, just an advocate for innovation. And it is really exciting to hear where we currently are in the landscape because, as Jacob has mentioned, it has been decades in the making. And so, I think why this is so important for right now and why the whole panel came together and this project is so important is traditionally we have faced the challenge of adoption. And it's a little bit of a catch-22 where we want to include clinical digital measures in clinical trials, but they want them to be FDA approved, and FDA wants a greater body of evidence. As we recently said, we want to raise the tide of evidence. But in order to make that happen, we really need to have everyone come together as we just have, identify those core measures, and be able to lend a little bit of fertile soil to cultivate that body of evidence. And so doing that will, obviously, as we mentioned earlier, increase, that clinical meaningfulness, right? But not only just the clinical meaningfulness of interventions, but what is meaningful for patients. So as Jessica said, we are still operating in sometimes in a very archaic manner when all of this innovation is there. So let's, really drive the bus forward and bring it forward. And that's why it's important.
Thanks for that, Mona.
Yeah, I was just going to add, nice to meet you all, Mona Barman. I'm also a licensed clinical psychologist and the director of care transformation at BetterHelp, where part of our role is really thinking about quality improvement, and how we evolve our care models. And I think, you'd ask like, what do the current assessments miss? And I think from a clinical practice, we're asking people to remember, like we're taking episodic snapshots when we know on the day-to-day mental health symptoms fluctuate. And I think some of the common assessments often just ask, do you have an impairment in sleep? Where you don't really know what does that mean. And these digital tools allow us and provide so much more rich data. And with that, you can really target, is it that you're sleeping too much? Is it that you're waking up at night, and target those interventions to deliver more personalized care?
Yeah, I'll add in there clinical psychologist as well. So what excites me about what's happening now versus historical is we get to really finally measure what makes the patient a person. Historically, we've measured assessments focused on symptoms, symptom severity, diagnostic criteria, but so much of the human experience is lived in how we speak and we move, we express emotion, and we engage in the world. And so that's something that traditional measures have missed. And now with advances in AI and digital measurement, we can quantify aspects of behavior that were previously just like difficult or impossible to measure at scale. And as Mona just mentioned, that allows us to get more towards precision mental health care and really treating the individual, the person in front of us, not just the patient, and rather than simply assigning or mapping diagnostic criteria. So we're definitely moving away from measuring disorders and measuring people, which is really exciting.
That's really helpful and insightful. And I think what I'm hearing here is this concept of traditional approaches giving us a fairly static point in time view, whereas digital measurement can start to capture that day-to-day variation and the lived experience of the patients at a more broader scale. Building on that, how can these digital measurements support clinical research and care for common mental health disorders, particularly as we start to think about the specific things we covered in our application guides from endpoints, phenotyping, and into that care setting? Brett, I'll pass it back to you again.
Yeah, no, it's a good segue because we were just talking about the traditional measures and some of the limitations. I think that they still have their place. We just heard that CMS still anchors some of the reimbursement in some of these traditional measures. But really, how these digital measures are going to support research and care is it allows us to see beyond what's just in those metrics. Those measures are typically just the end result of deeper processes, of deeper journeys, more complex journeys. So digital measures really allow us to look at objective behavioral signals. And in research, particularly, that gives us richer phenotyping and more sensitive endpoints. In clinical care, again, as a clinician, it helps us move beyond self-report. We know, we are horrible in self-reporting. As just mentioned, we're asking people to remember very specific pieces of their lives over many weeks or months. And so these things really allow us to get beyond the self-report and beyond variable human observation, just those snapshots that we see when the patient is in front of us, but what happens when they're not in front of us? And that's where really progress or digression is really happening. So we need to better understand their patient journey and how they're responding to treatment and where intervention is needed. So digital measures really help us understand the mechanisms behind those traditional measures.
Arti.
Yeah, definitely agree with everything that Brett said. And just to add to that, I think having these objective measures can also, in the context of research or even real world implementation, can help to improve adherence, tackle the missing data problem that I think was brought up in the last panel that, a lot of people don't complete the self-report questionnaires. And so this is a way to actually capture data when we really need it. A lot of times we're just modeling what we think the person would have said because we don't have enough data. Um, and yeah, improve adherence and engagement. And also these measures, I think, will be more understandable to the individuals, like understanding their sleep, understanding their activity, and how that maps onto how they're feeling. I think will also help a lot with adherence as a whole.
When we're thinking about actually implementing these, great use cases there, but where do you think organizations might be getting stuck when they're trying to pull these in for those implementations to gain those insights?
I'll jump in there
Sharon.
just as a clinician myself, is that you have to make it easy, right? You have to make it embedded within the, clinician's workflow. But also, I think the hook is just showing how effective it is, right? So we are going from a state of reactive care to a state of proactive care. And in some cases, it alleviates the burden of the clinician themselves, not just the patient. So as clinicians, we're constantly trying to, as Brett said, get that patient reported data to be able to understand, okay, what intervention is going to be, most effective. But now with, continuous monitoring passively, it alleviates the burden of the patient, but it also increases the accuracy of that data. And we're able to get ahead, right, of the patient reporting. So I don't know any clinician that isn't excited about reducing, the distress of their patient, right? So if we can get ahead of that and we can have an early intervention, it's pretty exciting what the future is going to look like. And also remove that barrier of entry is that you need to get sick enough to get a support. No, we can identify it early on, provide that early intervention, and improve that outcome.
I was just gonna, oh, sorry. I was just
Yeah, go
gonna
ahead,
add
Mona.
on to what Sharon said because I totally agree. This is so exciting. And at the same time, I think I don't want to miss or I want to highlight that there's also importance in educating clinicians when to act versus not, right? Like that signal to noise ratio when we're collecting so much data, how do we translate that to what is meaningful, and how do we use that in a meaningful way, in an interpretable way?
think that is extremely important to highlight, the burden from the patient side as well as potential clinical side as well, and kind of what those needs are that we need to make sure are met when we're thinking about adding this technology in for support. What areas do you think that we can start moving really rapidly with in incorporating digital measurements for common mental health, either in research or care? And then what elements might we need to be a little bit more cautious about or be thoughtful about when we start to deploy additional digital technologies? And Arthi, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So to answer your first question, like what can we do quickly? I think, and we touched on this a little bit when we were just speaking, but I think establishing feasibility is going to be important. So actually seeing how these measurements work in the real world, in clinical trials. And I think starting with feasibility research will really help in better understanding how to appropriately implement and interpret these measurements. I think that's going to be critical, especially in the context of, as you were saying, Mona, ensuring that clinicians understand exactly what these measurements mean, ensuring that patients understand them, and demonstrating that they actually work when implemented.
I'll add in real quick on sometimes we get stuck in that workflow. Sharon mentioned that these tools need to be in the workflow of the clinician. I think that's important to acknowledge. And I'll acknowledge and caveat that as long as that workflow is not antiquated in and of itself, because then we're just putting digital tools inside a system that is perpetuating the problem. So I think there's pieces of how do we implement the tool in the workflow, but also how do we update our workflows. And as clinicians, that's hard. And so we're going to have to encourage and educate, as Mona said, our clinicians, and I include myself in this, on how to kind of get out of just what's easiest or what's in my current workflow and really sort of think about the future of our workflows and change that as well to align and adopt digital tools. Otherwise, we're just going to, like we did in surveys 10 years ago, is just digitize the same paper and pencil and didn't really make an impact. It just digitized it. If we take these digital tools, insert them into an antiquated system, we'll see the same result. We got to change both sides.
Super impactful there. Mona, I would like to get your insights in this question as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with, with what everybody said. And the only other place that I think I would add in terms of maybe not where to slow down, but where to, I think we need to be cautious and handle with care is everything that surrounds sort of the privacy and data and trust. I think that's a really big component where as we collect these digital measures, it's personal behavior data and, patients need to know what's happening with that data, how it's being collected, how it's being used. And I think organizations have a responsibility to treat that data with care and responsibility. So.
That was an amazing element to add and a key and core consideration as we developed out our resources here, really thinking about the role of privacy and consent as we are implementing this and being able to reconsent, allowing patients to really decide what they want to share, when they want to share, and making sure that they want to continue to share that along their journey as well. With that, I'd like to kind of go on to our next question and similar to the other panelists of what's next. How do you see these measurements shaping the future of care and research for common mental health disorder as the field moves towards that more proactive, personalized, and continuous approaches? And maybe I'll go back to you, Mona, and start there.
Yeah, I think this has been said and kind of the theme throughout, but we're really shifting our healthcare from being like reactive and waiting for someone until they're really sick and then meet a diagnostic criteria to receive care into this predictive, proactive approach. And I think having these measures can really help transform, like I think about it from that predictive analytics, and how we can get in there earlier and sooner and really help people before they're like in desperate need or have to, quote unquote, if you will, meet this diagnostic threshold. And that's exciting to me. I mean, yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Arthi, your perspectives on how this will move forward in the future.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Mona said. I think what's going to additionally be important if we do move towards a more proactive model is getting um, stakeholders on board across the board. So, we heard from CMS and FDA earlier, so I think those stakeholders have to be on board with that, payers, providers. So it's challenging. I think we know what I think we know what would be the best approach forward, especially like in implementing these digital measures. But unless we get everyone on board, it's going to be difficult to actually see the value over time. So that's an important challenge, I think.
Yeah,
Agreed. Go ahead,
I'll
Brett.
jump in there. Yeah, it's a complex. There's a lot of moving parts to make anything adopt in our healthcare system, especially US based. A lot of moving parts. I think it's going to take everyone. But I think I observe the pieces starting to move. We hear that the FDA is trying to remove regulatory barriers and align and expedite tools that can be regulated and safe, but get into the hands of patients and providers to make an impact more quickly. As we do that and we implement that into research and care, the payers, CMS, and all they'll start to align. We just heard that there's already some incentive there. Um, is that enough to make the providers move? We gotta align that a little bit more. I think at the same time, these phenotypings will evolve again beyond our diagnostic criteria, and we'll begin describing in the very near future, describing patients not just by clinical criteria, but by the objective behavioral and functional characteristics that predict the risk, treatment, response, and outcomes. So think DSM-6, DSM-6-TR, or whatever. Like we will start to see phenotyping in these more objective measures being part of the way in which we view and categorize and otherwise not categorize patients so that we can really get to precision mental health care. I think that's sooner than later. Historically, behavioral health has been 17 years behind what's in the literature, is what Harvard said. So I think that gap is shortening. We're seeing the research come out, the practices come out, and that being much more quickly adopted into practice and hopefully aligned with the greater ecosystem.
And I'll just add to that what's exciting about this for me is that not only are we, like improving what is going to be meaningful for the patient, but we're really using these measures to empower them and make them the experts on themselves, right? So it's not just, oh, we're going to listen to everything and we're going to assess it based on our clinical expertise. Is that no, you know you best. And these measures are going to give you that data to know you best and then really help empower you to do what needs to get done to improve. And you don't just have to come to us, right? So I think there's that future of being able to be more in control of your own health.
Thank you so much for that. It's such a great way to wrap up this discussion. As a reminder of our ultimate goal here is really to support patients and empower them to better understand and get the care that they need when they need it, and making sure that we're getting them the right treatments that best support them, and making sure that they feel empowered. So really appreciate each and every one of you and the perspectives that you shared throughout this panel. It's been a pleasure getting to speak with you today and working with you in your partnership and shaping this work over the last several months again. And with that, it's been extremely valuable, helpful in hearing from everyone today and how we're thinking about the field moving forward and where we're heading. And as we wrap up today's discussion, reflect on a broader effort to move the field towards more objective, continuous, and patient-centered approaches to understand and supporting people living with common mental health disorders. And this work, again, would only have been possible because of the collaboration and shared commitment by a truly diverse group of stakeholders who help shape and challenge the way of thinking along the way. And so I want to give one more thank you and shout out to the partners that made all of this possible. Each and every one of you greatly appreciate the work you are doing and continue to do in this space, and making sure that we do truly make sure that patients can receive the best treatments that are tailored to them, and that we can start personalizing this care across common mental health disorders. And with that, looking ahead at some of the work that DIMES continue to build across this foundation in a few key areas, one of which is expanding how we think about measurement in rare pediatric diseases, building on our previous work by defining how individual measures can be combined into composite and multimodal endpoints for clinical development and regulatory decision making, with continued emphasis on ensuring meaningful outcomes and patients' experience are captured appropriately in these populations. If this is of interest to you, please connect with us at DIME. We'd love to explore opportunities to work with you in this area. Another area that we are engaging in is operationalizing AI governance in healthcare through our Connected Health Collaborative community. This project is convening leaders across the ecosystem to create an open source toolkit that will organize and integrate existing guidances into practical, usable resources. So if you're in the front line of AI in healthcare, we invite you to join us for this as well. And finally, we're continuing some work on post-contracting operational readiness for virtual first care, focusing on ensuring providers are fully integrated, discoverable, and reimbursable from day one through shared practical resources and best practices co-created with payers and providers. So if you are in the virtual first care space, welcome your engagement there as well. Please connect with us. And before we close, I wanted to once again recognize this incredible group of partners who contributed to this work. Their expertise, perspective, and willingness to engage critically were essential to getting us here. I'd also like to extend a warm thank you to our team at DIME for making this work possible, and the support and collaboration that is behind the scenes every day from this wonderful organization. Thank you again to all of our collaborators, to everyone who is here today that has joined us in this discussion. We are very excited to share these resources with you and hope you will enjoy using them and sharing them with your colleagues. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and we will see you again at our next DIME event. Thank you.